And with that being said, welcome to all of you who are viewing this virtually. Technology is amazing, isn't it? You can be thousands, 10,000 miles away and feel like you're sitting right here in attendance with everybody else. And I can't think of any better place that I'd rather be right now than with God's people on this Sabbath day, other than Maui. My hypocrisy only goes so far, and perhaps maybe Aruba. But the bottom line is there's nothing better when people of like mind come together, is there? To talk about the things pertaining to our salvation, pertaining to things that God has in store for all of mankind, but most people, quite frankly, don't understand and don't get. But here we are, chosen vessels, impregnated, if you will, with God's Holy Spirit, who understand things as much as God clearly wants us to understand, according to what He's doing with mankind, who He is, who we are compared to Him. How do we figure into this life? What is the meaning of life? It just simply is amazing, brethren, the things that God has shared with us pertaining to salvation and what really is beyond this life. And I hope you're with me in this, and I hope you agree with me that, man, I hope there's something better on the other side of this. I'm pretty sure there is, because life can be beleaguering sometimes, can it? The reason I said I'm happy to be here today, for more than one reason, is, man, I had a heck of a time getting here. It's like my life is like, you ever watch the movie Planes, Trains, and Automobiles? My goodness, I don't laugh at that movie anymore because I'm living it. I mean, last time it was a flood. A flood in Ohio is going to keep me from giving a sermon. Who would ever thought that? We've had all kinds of rain. But last night, brethren, as I was coming back from the gym, preparing to come home and study my sermon, our brakes went out in our car. And so I decided I would fix the brakes, and as things go in Ohio, being on the Rust Belt, started snapping bolts. So after I had all the parts I thought I needed to fix these brakes, I needed some other parts. So I called the auto parts store. Mr. Buchert, we're going to have to order those parts for you. So I borrowed a car from my mom, and go to start it up this morning and heading my way up this way, and guess what? Car won't start. It's like, what is going on here? And by the way, does anybody have those newer cars? We have those key fobs. Apparently the battery went dead in my mom's key fob. And you know there's a way you can still start your car. This is just a personal safety announcement. If you hold your key fob right up to the start button, your car will start. And if you can't unlock it, usually there's a key that's hidden within those fobs, and there's a little hidden key access so you can unlock your doors and stuff like that. So find out how your car works before you run into trouble. But here we are, brethren, on God's Sabbath day, and it certainly is, like I said, good to be here. And I'd like to start out today where I began on this sermon series. We're now on part 4. I've done three parts of this sermon series, and I hope you're enjoying it. But start out where I began over here in the book of Colossians. In the book of Colossians, chapter 2. And by the way, I meant to say this when I came up here. I want to express to the church, not just the church here, but those who are extended viewership members of the Church of God International, for your prayers regarding my mother, who you remember roughly now, what was it, Angie, about a month ago? We've had a summer of parents being in hospitals, from Angie's mom to heart problems, to my mom 2 times now being in the hospital. Now we're pretty much my mother's personal caregiver until she recovers. She had fallen in her house, and she lives about 50 yards, if that, 30 yards maybe behind our house. And so as time begins to reveal new details about what really happened, she couldn't get up and ended up crawling on the floor for like 9 hours instead of calling us. And so we go to the hospital, and they're looking at heart problems and stroke, and basically what it amounts to is she has an extremely bad back like me. I've got 5 major disabilities on my back, so I take after my mother. And so because she couldn't go in and get this, I guess people go in and get these cortisone shots in their back. Nancy, you probably had those, didn't you? So what happened was she didn't move that much, and so her legs became atrophied. So she couldn't move her legs is what happened. So now we're in the process of getting her some rehab, so hopefully hopefully, God willing, she's going to be able to drive again. That's still up in the air. But anyways, heartfelt thank you to all you guys, because she is upright. She is walking again with a walker. But man, you just never know how these things are going to turn out. But over here, brethren, I want to start out where I began 3 sermons ago, and hopefully what I'll do today is I'll finish up this part of the series, part 4 of the sermon series, The Benchmarks of a Mature Christian. Now, when I started this sermon series, I had made the disclaimer that you might have different ideas about what components are involved in us becoming spiritually mature in our walk with Christ. We focus on different things sometimes. I tend to focus on some of my weaknesses. My dad taught me that as a little kid. He was I don't know if I've told you this or not, but he knew Arnold Schwarzenegger, and he worked out with Arnold Schwarzenegger. So every time I'd have trouble doing something in the weight room, my weakness, he'd say, well, that's what you got to work on. You got to work on your weaknesses. People say focus on your strengths. There's a positive side to that, but focus on your weaknesses. So I'm looking at some things in my life, and I'm thinking, I've got some benchmarks I need to get better at in my life. I think we all self-examine sometimes. But it goes and it speaks to a goal that not only the Apostle Paul had, but also the goal of the ministry for roughly 2,000 years now, what the goal of the ministry is, at least a part of it, as we preach the gospel of Jesus Christ, not only to those out there who have never heard the gospel, but to those who have heard it for decades. What is our goal here? Well, I think the Apostle Paul, in a big way, really brings this to light. He says this, Colossians 1, over here in verse 27, we read this. To them God willed to make known what are the riches of his glory, of the mystery among the Gentiles, which Christ in you, the hope of glory. Him we preach, warning every man and teaching every man in all wisdom, that we may present every man perfect in Christ. To this end I also labor, striving according to his working, which works in me mightily. So what was one of the Apostle Paul's main goal in preaching to the church, or writing his letters or his epistle to the church? What was one of his main goals, brethren? Well, that he would bring us, not only them in his time, but us down through the centuries, to a little Greek word called teleos. I've talked about this extensively. I'm not going to go back and rehash a lot of the definitions, so if you get a chance, you might want to go back and review some of those. But really what it equates to is bringing us to a place of spiritual maturity and a character that is more like Christ and less like our carnal nature. Does that make sense? Because as Wayne Hendricks always said, you remember years ago, what was the famous saying by Wayne Hendricks? Brethren, we are 99% carnal, and if we're lucky, about 1% spiritual, right? Because we all spend time in this life. The world tends to rub off on us, doesn't it? You ever feel the world kind of closing in on you? You kind of feel yourself giving in to the way the world treats people sometimes? You see, this thing called spiritual maturity takes effort. There's a lot of people out there that think the more knowledge that you gain, the gifts that you possess, these kind of things make us the mature Christian. But that's not really what makes us the mature Christian. I want to shift gears just a little bit. Now, those things help, don't get me wrong. They do help. But I want to shift gears just a little bit, because in the first couple series I talked about, let's think about this. I talked about having habitual prayer life. Is that important to becoming spiritually mature? Well, I think part of being spiritually mature is having a conversation with our Creator, is it not? To find out what His will is, what His way is, to make sure that we're implementing the things that He wants us to do with as much perfection as we're possibly able to do. And by the way, do any of us execute perfectly 100% of the time? I can only speak for myself. I certainly don't. I'm reminded of my flaws almost daily, and if I don't remind myself, my wife does. My wife will remind me of my flaws. Just keep me humble a little bit, I guess. But it takes time. It takes effort. It's not instantaneous. It's a lot like physical maturity. You start out, you're born, you go through the processes of life, you mature, not only physically, but mentally. It does take time. So we focused on the first ones, on personal habits of prayer, study, We talked about not losing our identity in times of duress. Remember that sermon? One of the greatest examples of being who you are, that is a Christian, in times of duress, there's no greater example than that of Jesus the Christ. You remember when he's being crucified, he's there between two criminals. Do you remember that? Would you consider that a time of duress in his life? Because I certainly would if I'm up on a stake and the criminals are making their accusations. One of them comes to his senses and say, look, man, we deserve what we're getting. we deserve our just reward, but this man has done nothing. And you remember the famous statement, today you will be with me in paradise. Not timing, but I tell you today you will be with me in paradise. I'd like to shift focus today, though, brethren, to part 4 here. And working towards maturity sooner or later, we realize that God has put us all here together to found all these relationships. And the question I'd like to ask today, how much importance does God place on our personal relationships with one another? Our personal relationships with those in the church, personal relationships with those in our family, our personal relationships and our conversations with those who are out there in society. Does it matter how much value we place on our relationships that we make over the years? I would say yes. I would say yes, it doesn't matter. It's very, very important because, brethren, by and large, I think you would agree, we live in a society that seems to be becoming more and more selfish as time goes on. And I don't mean to be too harsh on society. There's good people out there. I see good examples too, so I'm not saying mankind has reached total depravity. I'm not saying that. But I think there's room, if we're honest, to admit, is there room in society to use just a little bit more kindness to people? I think the world would be a lot better place if people were just nice. Just be nice to one another. Even when we don't feel like being nice. That's hard sometimes, isn't it? When somebody's treating you ill-manneredly, what's our first response? Oh, I can tell you mine. I can tell you mine. And that's not because I'm patting myself on the back, it's because I've got work to do. When someone hurls insults or accusations, or they're just rude to you, I see a lot of it in business. Sometimes I even see it in church. My response isn't always, I love you, brother. What's our response, brother? Let's just be transparent. We're always honest. Isn't it to get even? Sometimes you ever feel the need when someone says something to you, don't you want to just shoot something back? Oh man, I told them. Man, I let them have it, didn't I? That's my natural inclination. I think that is the carnal way in which we respond because that is second nature to us, isn't it? To react. There's a difference between reaction and response. Reaction is emotional. Response is calculated with thought. It's not a recluse attitude. It's not Katie bar the door. Let's bring the house down with everything I'm about to say. If there's one thing that gets me in trouble in life, it's this right here. This little instrument right here is my mouth. And I've been trying to work on this and trying to get better at it, trying not to react, but trying to respond. Because when the dust settles, brethren, the bottom line is we're here with each other. We should be valuing these relationships to a point where even if we have to make reparations or repairs to the relationship and reconcile, that is probably the best thing for everybody involved. It makes everybody feel good. Nobody loses when there's something called reconciliation. I think part of the reason why the world is the way it is nowadays with just so much rudeness and so much carelessness towards other human beings, I think it's because of the dismantling of the core family values in America. It used to be mom and dad modeled these values. And when mom and dad modeled these values, and then the kids would go to church and they would see these values, because remember, the church used to be the center hub of all social activities from roughly the 1950s on back. It started to dwindle in 1950s, 1960s. People treat each other rudely because this, quite frankly, brethren, in some realms of society, in some corners, this doesn't matter anymore. Question is, do we believe this? The question is, the benchmarks that God has laid before us that reside right here in our Bibles, will we embrace them? Or do we just read them and move on? You see, there's a lot of benchmarks. I've only covered just a little bit of these things, but with the dismantling of the family, with the lack of role models sometimes, I think people just kind of act the way they do. In our county where we live, I won't say where that's at, and I won't mention names or anything like that, but Angie and I moved to the country. There's many facets to this, but one of the reasons we wanted to move to the country is because we wanted to be around nicer people. Man, it's just like exchanging one kind of rudeness for another. Country folks are just much more nicer at being rude than city folks. That's really what it is. I can remember my father-in-law saying, I bet the spiders are really big out here, aren't they? Yeah, they are, but they're much nicer than city spiders, I can tell you that. But people are people, no matter where you go in society, in church. But in our society, in our county rather, you would think that being in the country would be a lot better. But just this year, just this past year, not even a year, but just several months, we've had 2 sheriff's deputies killed in the line of duty. You ever get the sense that people are starting to lose their patience and starting to lose their temper, and they're starting to lose their sanity just a little bit? 2 sheriff's deputies. Then, at the grocery store we shop at, there's a Kroger by our house, and oftentimes is the case with this grocery store, there's a Dollar General right next to it. Now we're talking the country folk, nice people. One man went into a Dollar General and shot and killed another man over a parking spot. Parking spot. A parking spot? There's 200 other parking spots out there. But you see, people take things so personally, don't they? It's not a parking spot. No, man, you got something against me. This is personal. So guess what? I'll just shoot you. Brethren, Christians, in our quest for spiritual maturity and a more Christ-like attitude, ought to be more level on the playing field here. A little bit more balanced, a little bit more accepting of the way things are in society, and do our best not to retort in like manner. And that's the hard thing to do. I have a hard time, brethren, in traffic sometimes. Do you? Jeff, yeah, that's okay. My hands, if I could raise both hands, I'm raising both hands right now. Especially when you got a sermon to do and you're driving on a highway that's 55 miles an hour and you can't pass and somebody's doing 35. And I'm thinking, I hope Bill has a sermon ready. Maybe someone has a sermon ready, but it challenges me. Or go to the grocery store. You've been to the grocery store lately? Have you ever noticed how grocery stores almost make it impossible for people to be friendly to each other nowadays? You walk down the aisle. Display after display after display, and you find yourself weaving in and out of these displays. And at the same time, a lot of people forget the laws of physics that 2 physical objects cannot occupy the space at the same time, and so they try to push through you. Or you got the one I call the chugga-chug. They're chugga-chugga, 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 and they're behind you, and you can feel their cart on your heel. Oh my gosh, man. I was at the store with Angie yesterday. Walking down this aisle, and of course, Kroger has all these things stacked in the middle of us, so you're walking through like this, and there's this lady behind me. I can feel her. Her cart is like, she's going like this, trying to get around me. So finally, I feel it. Slow burn, slow burn, slow burn. And I went, benchmarks of a mature Christian, benchmarks of a mature Christian. So I stepped to the side. Perhaps you'd like to go, ma'am. You're in a bigger hurry than I am. That's not what I wanted to say, though. That's not what I wanted to say. Or when I'm on the job and I'm washing windows, sometimes it's a storefront, and I got my squeegee in my hand, I'm going back and forth on this door, and somebody, boom, excuse me, comes rushing through, and I'll say, never mind, I've got 5 more other fingers on this hand, don't worry about the ones you just took off, And they say, excuse me. And sometimes excuse me, is an excuse for their rudeness. It doesn't really mean excuse me. It means I know I was rude, see you later, I'm in a hurry. So Christians, decompress. We got to decompress because it would be so easy. I'm telling you, I'm talking from my own experience. I'm not putting words in your mouth, but it would be so easy for me to step on that carnal side, and instead of saying, you're more in a hurry than me, perhaps you should go first, it'd be easy to say, I won't say it. But you know what I mean? You know what I mean? To control our emotions is paramount to spiritual maturity. He that can control his emotions, what does it say, can rule cities? I'm on a quest. I'm on a quest to figure this out. I'm on a quest to find out what it is that God wants from me in order to become more spiritually mature and become more Christ-like as his son was. You will find no greater example than Christ. The Apostle Paul rings it home over here in the book of Romans chapter 12. It's hard to do sometimes, brethren. It really is. I don't think there's anything wrong with admitting that, is there? There's nothing wrong with admitting that sometimes society takes us beyond our ability to handle sometimes the emotions that go along with the rudeness that's out there. I hope I'm not the only one that is still on this humanistic level sometimes, because I really would like to respond in kind. But you see, this life is no longer our own anymore. The Bible says we're purchased with a price. The redemption of the blood of Jesus Christ, and he owns us, brethren. And here we are as people, not thinking we're better than the world, but trying to conduct ourselves better than the world, and hoping that we have some, some victories every now and then, some achievements in our moral character. There's not anybody that will walk into the kingdom of God perfect other than Jesus Christ. We have faults, don't we? Can I see a show of hands of anybody who does not have sin in their life, who does not sin? You're scratching your forehead. You try to get me on that, Steve. He almost got me on that one. No. The one thing that Christians in a mature perspective ought to understand, we're not better than anybody. We're just forgiven. We're trying to do better. And the Apostle Paul here in Romans chapter 12, verses 17 through 21, recognizes that. The one thing that we have to realize in this thing called emotions when we're out there in society or in church is there are some people, brethren, I don't mean to burst our bubbles, because not everybody responds to kindness. There are some cantankerous people out there. I know one of them. I can't ever make the guy smile. I won't tell you his name. I don't want to embarrass him. He's not in the church. He owns the oil well on our property. And man, this guy has a fuse about that short, and he's so angry and so nasty. The nicer I try to be to this guy, the meaner and nastier that he gets. It got to a point we only talked to each other through attorneys, because he was that nasty. No matter what I do, he's always angry. He's just always angry. But the Apostle Paul says this. There's still an onus on us. He says in verse 17, repay no one evil for evil. What does our carnality teach us, though? Oh, yeah, buddy. That's the last time you'll wrong me. Wait till I'm done with you, right? That's what I feel like sometimes. Have regard for good things in the sight of all men. If, notice that word, I've often said the word if, just 2 letters, is one of the most powerful words in the human language. It really is, because sometimes it causes us to think, doesn't it? If. It shows conditions. It shows parameters. It shows limits. It shows possibilities. It's both positive and both negative in our application of the word if. Very, very important word. If it is possible, meaning you have alleviated and you have went through every possible means to reconcile, if it is possible, as much depends on you, live peaceably with all men. Boy, that's a lofty goal, isn't it? That's a lofty goal, but we don't get to wiggle out of that. That's what God expects. We're supposed to live peaceably among all men as much as depends upon us, not reacting the same way that people do sometimes. And he continues, Beloved, do not avenge yourselves, but rather give place to wrath, for it is written, Vengeance is mine, I will repay, says the Lord. Therefore, if your enemy is hungry, feed him. If he is thirsty, give him a drink. For in so doing, you will heap coals of fire on his head. Do not be overcome with evil, but overcome evil with good. What does the word evil mean? You ever do a study on that? The word evil? Well, it's pretty broad in scope and in its meaning. It covers anything from being rude to one another, gossiping about one another, whether it's here or outside or in your family or what it is, talking nastily to one another, gossiping, slander. It runs the whole gamut of human carnality and sometimes how we treat each other in the negative sense. It covers a whole wide range of things. It really does. Vengeance is mine. Do not be overcome, or in other words, do not succumb to it, returning in like manner. Boy, that's sometimes hard to do when we live in this life, but I think it certainly is worth repeating that Christians have a hard job sometimes because while we're walking in this life, we're trying to fight our carnality. Well, that carnality is still there, but oftentimes, brethren, we forget that we are supposed to set the example for society. We really are. Anybody who ever has told you, like they told me, that Christianity is easy, didn't know what they were talking about. Because it takes a lot of work. And it takes a lot of discipline to be a disciple of Christ. If you break down the word disciple, what's the root word? Discipline. It takes discipline. It really does. Last time I told you a story about my wife and I when we were first married and the conflict that went on in our marriage. You remember that? Over a twist tie on the bread, a loaf of bread. Here we are, newlyweds, trying to live life. We never lived together. My family always told me, you better live with her for a while so you can see what she's like before you marry her. Like, I don't know, man. I don't think I want to do that because I was trying to follow this. I was doing my best. And then she had this thing where she always liked to make sure the bread was fresh. So she'd take this twisty tie and she'd do it and do it and do it. It was so tight, finally got to the point you could even see the end. It was not discernible from the other piece of twine. And we went back and forth, and finally I had to say, have your twisty tie. It's really not that important. This is not the hill that I want to die on. But we're supposed to set the example. We really are. And to do that, brethren, we really have to be aware of the needs of others in our lives. And Jesus says this over here in Luke. Is it Luke chapter 6, I think? Luke chapter 6. Yeah, turn with me to Luke chapter 6. It's funny when you first get married, and even years and years after you live together. I better get this one right because I got to ride home with her. But I think I've known Angie, 37 years? Well, see, you don't even know, do you? I think it was 37 years, and sometimes we still have differences. There's still some conflict in our personalities every once in a while. Like, if I'm not 15 minutes early, I'm an hour late. That's the way I see things. Angie's like, I'll get there. Like, she'll wake up in the mornings to go to work, and I'll sit there and look at my phone. Hey, it's 6:45. I thought you're supposed to leave at 6:30. I'll get there when I get there. And it drives me crazy. No, you got to get there early. No, I don't. Yes, you do. And so we go back and forth. So this morning I'm headed out right before I found out the car wasn't going to start. I'm in my suit, got my satchel. Man, I'm ready to go. And here's Angie cooking breakfast. What are you doing? I'm cooking breakfast. We got to go. I'm hungry. I'll buy you something on the way. I'm eating. Like, yeah, and I'm going. Benchmarks of a mature Christian. Benchmarks of a mature Christian. That was a low shot there. You didn't have to say that. You didn't have to bring it to it. You didn't have to say that. But we have differences. Sometimes we have personality conflicts. Sometimes we have different ways of doing things, and that not only applies to the family, but applies in society, at work, and it can also apply inside the church as well. You ever think about that, what God has brought together here? Maybe Bill and I would never meet if it weren't for church. Maybe Jeff and I may not have anything in common if it weren't for the Bible. Maybe we would never cross paths in this life if it weren't for this calling right here in this Bible. So here we are. Here we are in this laboratory, doing our best to overcome this world. And like the Apostle Paul, by any means I might attain to the resurrection and get into the kingdom. And sometimes, brethren, even we rub shoulders wrong sometimes, don't we? That's part of the lesson. That's a part of the lesson of being mature, is learning how to get along with one another even when we have differences. But carnality says anything else. But Jesus says this. He says, and this can apply, like I said, in all those different facets of our lives, all personal lives, work, home, church, whatever it is. And he says this in Luke chapter 6, in verse 32. But if you love those who love you, what credit is that to you? For even sinners love those who love them. Oh, how true is that? How true that is. They say birds of a feather tend to flock together. I have no problem with loving somebody that loves me. That's easy. To me, that's easy. But when you have to love somebody that doesn't like you or doesn't love you, boy, that's a classroom lesson, isn't it? An exercise in selflessness and humility. That's hard to do. So he really puts the onus on us here in Luke chapter 6. And if you lend to those whom you hope to receive back, what credit is that to you? For even sinners lend to sinners and to receive as much back. But love your enemies. Oh, that one hurts. That one hurts. That one is one that is really meant for spiritual growth, for maturity in the Holy Spirit, because that's really what this is about. When someone hates you, it's not easy to love them, is it? They make it hard. They make it difficult. Oftentimes harder and more difficult than what it has to be. And he continues, love your enemies, do good and lend, hoping for nothing in return, and you will have your reward. And your reward will be great, and you will be sons of the Most High, for He is kind to the unthankful and the evil. Man, I've got a lot of work to do. I think I've gotten better at some things. I think if you examine your life, I think you've done better at some things too. But the honest part of me, and I hope I'm always honest, is I still have a lot of work to do when it comes to these scriptures right here, because people can make it very, very difficult sometimes. They really can. Judge not, and you shall not be judged. Condemn not, and you shall not be condemned. Forgive, and you will be forgiven. You realize that in the Bible, Jesus mentions there are conditions to forgiveness? What happens if we don't forgive others? What did Jesus say? Then you shouldn't expect to be forgiven. It's all about maturity. It's all about a different perspective in this life, brethren. It certainly is. And we got to think about our actions, brethren, and our words. One thing that a mature Christian ought to do, ought to always keep in mind, and this is the problem that I have sometimes, is thinking before we speak. You ever heard that before? Better think about that. My dad had me read this book. I'm going to try to remember when I was a kid. I had a horrible attitude with people. How to Win Friends and Influence People is a salesman book. I was just one of those kids. I had a mouth on me. Oh, if you're a jerk, I'm like, dude, you're just a jerk. And my dad said, you think, Tony, there's perhaps a better way you could say that and not cause so much conflict with people? He said, you can tell someone they're a jerk. You can just tell them in a different way, and they'll never realize you're calling them a jerk. You can be nice about it. You can tell them that you have conflict, but you don't have to be so rude in your interactions with people. And boy, was he right. Boy, was he right, man. So sometimes that tends to be our fallback, to think before we speak. Over here in Proverbs chapter 26, one thing that a mature Christian achieves or tries to achieve in this walk with Christ and thinking before they speak is first to consider, when should I speak and when should I not speak? Because there is a time to speak, and if you've ever done some studies on some of the interactions that Jesus had with some of the Pharisees and the Sadducees and those people that were the religious leaders of the time, he called them hypocrites. If you ever want to see a time when Jesus kind of contradicts what a lot of the thought is about Jesus Christ and his character, just go to Matthew chapter 23. You ever read Matthew chapter 23? Oh, buddy, he didn't pull any punches, did he? Matthew chapter 23 erases any and all delusions that Jesus Christ never spoke an unkind word in his life, because he is excoriating the religious leaders of the time. You're nothing but whitewashed tombs full of dead man's bones. He's going through all of these things, and he is just taking them up and down of their true character, and he pulled no punches. The difference between us and Christ is we don't have the ability to read people's intent like he did, so we got to be careful with that. But there is a time to speak, and Proverbs here brings it up over here in verse 5. No, go to verse 3, if you would, of Proverbs chapter 26. A whip for the horse, a bridle for the donkey, and a rod for the fool's back. Do not answer a fool according to his folly, lest you be like him. That's where most people stop. All right? No, I can't say anything back to anybody. I can't talk back. I can't say anything rudely. Why? Lest you be like him. You don't want to fall into the same trap that they're approaching you with, right? But what most people, where they stop at is right here. What they don't realize is he also follows up and says, answer a fool according to his folly, lest he be wise in his own eyes. There is a time to answer. We have to discern when that time is, and not only when the time is, but how we do that. Because it is a dance. It is a chess match sometimes on how we answer people. You got to be very, very selective. And sometimes, brethren, in our country, gaining mastery of this can be hard. You know why? Freedom of speech. Freedom of speech. I love it. I love freedom of speech. I'm an advocate of freedom of speech. But sometimes our freedom of speech can go a little bit too far. We're not saying we don't have freedom of speech, but if we have freedom of speech, guess what else we have? We get to deal with the ramifications of our words too. There is kickback when we're too rude to people, when we speak too harshly, but there is a time to speak back, just like Jesus said. As a matter of fact, Jesus went a little bit further than that sometimes. There are two occasions, brethren. I don't know if you realize this or not, but oftentimes people think there's only one occasion. But you realize Jesus had such a righteous indignation within himself, within him, because he was able to discern, that he took the whip to people twice. You're making my Father's house a den of thieves. You remember that? Happened twice. Once in the beginning of his ministry, and once right there, right after, or towards the end of his ministry, right around the time of his triumphal entry to Jerusalem on the donkey. There are two times which your Lord and Savior drove out people from the temple by force and not with very kind words. But that's Jesus. That's Jesus. I don't have that kind of discernment, brethren. But James talked about the dangers of the tongue. I think it was Mark Twain. Anybody ever study some of Mark Twain's stuff? Yeah, I try not to, because one thing I know about Mark Twain is he was an atheist. He was an atheist. But we can learn anything from anybody, can't we? Even if it's how not to do things. That's what my dad told me. Son, if you never learn anything from me, learn from the things that I didn't do right and don't repeat them. That's what he told me. Mark Twain said this: it is better to be silent. I'm paraphrasing because I don't have my quote in front of me. It's better to be silent than have others think you a fool than to open your mouth and remove all doubt. We can say too much. I thought it was a funny statement. But James says it this way. James chapter 3. James chapter 3. I'm sure all of you are somewhat acquainted with this. I'm not going to read the whole thing because it is a very lengthy, but he does say some true things about how someone can go too far with their tongue and how it also reveals character, how it reveals character in us sometimes. He says this, my brethren, in verse 1, let not many of you become teachers, knowing that we shall receive a stricter judgment. For we all stumble in many ways. That's what I was alluding to in my opening statements here. If anyone does not stumble in word, he is a perfect man, able also to bridle the whole body. Because our words, brethren, are a result of what's in our minds. Jesus said, for out of the abundance of a man's heart, he speaks. The word heart, in that context, it's also in Luke chapter 6 there, and also in the Beatitudes, I believe it is, uses the word heart, and the Greek word is cardia. Cardia. It's a heart issue. You ever notice how there is a connection between your heart and your brain and what comes out of our mouths? You ever notice that? It has been scientifically proven to be a fact that your heart is directly connected to your brain. It's called the vagus nerve. And that's why when you have an instance of fear, transitions go down here to your heart starts going boop, 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 like that. It's connected. Jesus said, out of the abundance of a man's heart, he speaks, because it comes from the hidden springs of one's character. That's basically what he says there in Luke chapter 6. It's the hidden springs of our character of which our mouth speaks from. So oftentimes, it reveals us, doesn't it? It reveals who we really are when we speak rashly and harshly, and we're not doing anything to really mend things. We're just kind of wrecking the place, if you will. He continues, indeed, we put bits in horses' mouths, in verse 3, that they may obey us, and they turn their whole body. Look at the ships. Although they are so large and driven by fierce winds, they are turned by a very small rudder wherever the pilot desires. Even so, the tongue is a little member and boasts great things. See how great a forest a little fire kindles. In other words, our mouth gets us into trouble sometimes. And our mouth reveals what's in the intent of our hearts and what's in our mind, and it reveals our true nature. We find ourselves talking to church people, and guess what? We start to let some cuss words slip out. Guess what? That's who we've become. Because our thoughts become words, our words become actions, and all those things that come together become our character. That's why it's so important that we tame this tongue. And the tongue is a fire, a world of iniquity. The tongue is so set among our members that it defiles the whole body and sets on fire the course of nature, and it is set on fire by hell. James isn't pulling any punches, is he? He's getting right to the heart of the issue. For every kind of beast and bird and reptile and creature of the sea is tamed and has been tamed by mankind, but no man can tame the tongue. It is unruly, evil, full of deadly poison. Why is it so important us not to be like that? He follows it up right here and says this, with it we bless our God and our Father, and with it we curse men who have been made in the similitude of God. God, thank you for this day. Thank you for the food I'm about to receive. Thank you. Keep us protected. And 5 minutes later, boy, that guy's a jerk. He's an idiot. Blessing God with one, cursing another who's made in the similitude of God, who, by the way, we're no better than. We're all flawed. It's just a matter of what our flaws are. Each one has his own load here. Does a spring send forth fresh water and bitter from the same opening? Can a fig tree, my brethren, bear olives, or a grapefruit, or bear figs? Thus no spring yields both salt water and fresh. Who is wise and understanding among you? Let him show by good conduct that his works are done in meekness and in wisdom. So again, the trifecta, family, society, and church, The way we speak to people, the way we react, or the way we respond says a lot about our character, and it's something that we have to gain mastery of, brethren. We have to think before we speak. I remember I had some conflict at the Feast of Tabernacles years ago, and I won't say who, I won't say where, I won't say when, but his conduct became so bad. So bad, he was actually poking me in the chest. And he was saying all kinds of things. Still to this day, I don't know what his problem was. But when I called somebody above me, it wasn't Bill, it was somebody else. Their question to me was, how did you keep your fist in your hand? I told him everything. I'm not going to say everything here. And my response was, because it's taken me decades to build my character. It's going to take one word or one action for me to ruin it. And that's really what it comes down to. How we respond or how we react. So that brings me, brethren, to my last point that I wanted to focus on in this sermon series. Spiritually minded people or spiritually mature people, when we do wrong somebody, because I know I've said some things that have wronged people before. Have you ever said anything that kind of ruffles people's feathers? Even though you didn't intend to, but you create an offense innocently, but it's there. And it's up to us to be open in acceptance of that and hear their complaint or whatever it is. But when these things happen, brethren, whether it's, I want to hit this on two fronts, and our personal issues with someone or they us, and there's another side to this. Over here in Matthew 18, if you will, please. I'll tell you the other side of this here in just a second. But what do we do, brethren, if we say too much or somebody says too much to us and we happen to be offended? Is there a way that we deal with this? Yes. Yes, there is a way to deal with this. I've known people over the years when they have conflict in the church or personality conflicts or differences, they'll just say, well, I suppose God will take care of that. No. No, see, there is an exercise in Christian maturity that has to happen, brethren, in order for us to meet the benchmarks. Mature Christians have conversations, adult conversations with one another, not accusatory, not inflammatory, not rough, not gruff, not unloving, but tender-hearted, merciful, soft communication in which our goal is to bring about reconciliation, restoration. That is our goal. But Matthew 18 is one of the most undervalued, most underused scriptures in the Bible. And if we just would simply do this sometimes in our family life, our work life, out in society, with the church, there's probably not much that we couldn't get through, conversation. So what happens if we wrong somebody, if we say too much or do so much? Verse 15, Jesus says this, moreover, if your brother sins against you, go and tell him his fault. By the way, this is where people try to wiggle out of this. Well, I didn't really commit a sin against you, so I'm not going to have to talk to you. Wait a minute. First of all, you can't sin against me. I'm not God. I can't sin against you because you're not God. What I can do is I can wrong you. I can misstep. I can cause a wrong. I can offend you. So that's on me to allow an audience with you to be acceptance of that, to say, hey, look, I don't think I did anything, but I want to hear. I want to hear you because I want to make it right. But the reason why people don't use this, brethren, you know why people don't use Matthew 18? Because it's hard. It's hard. And you better have a relationship with somebody before you do this. Because it probably won't go too well if you don't. If you don't know somebody and the first thing you say to them, I got issues with you. It's probably not going to fly real well. But if you have a relationship with somebody, hey, Bill, you know what, Bill? Forgive me for bringing this up. I really don't want to bring this up. I'm sorry, but you offended me a little bit. And then Bill says, I don't care. Get offended. That's your problem. Whoa. I can tell you what I'm never going to do again. I'm never going to go to Bill with Matthew 18 because I know I can't approach him. My point is, brethren, we got to be approachable one to another to have an adult, mature conversation. Not emotional, but but he continues here. Go and tell him his fault, but before you do that, tell everybody what's going on. Does it say that? You know what the word evil encompasses? Slander, backbiting, hateful conversations, untruths. We got to be careful of these things. Mature Christians don't do that. Go tell it between you and him alone. 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 You don't make a spectacle of it. You don't bring other people in. If he hears you, you have what? Salvage the relationship. You salvage it. You make reparations. You make it right. You've gained your brother. But if he will not hear, take with you one or two more, that by the mouth of 2 or 3 witnesses every word may be established. That means trust has been breached here. If you can't have a conversation with somebody without having 2 or 3 witnesses, there's a problem in the relationship. There's no trust there. And oftentimes, as I tell people, if I can't trust you, we have no relationship. Because I can't do that. I cannot have it with no trust. And if he refuses to hear them, tell it to the church. But if he refuses even to hear the church, let him to be to you like a heathen and a tax collector. What does that mean? Let me explain that a little bit. The ultimate goal of Matthew 18, when it's predicated on humility and forgiveness, the goal ought to be reparations and restoration. That's the ultimate goal. But if you talk to somebody, that was completely fabricated. There's no truth to that story. Bill's never responded to me like that. I don't even know if I've ever approached Bill like that. But if you can have that mature conversation and realize in all humility that we're all full of faults, it's easier to overlook a lot, isn't it? It really is. At least it is to me. But if they won't hear you, and then when you follow a prescription and they won't hear the people from the church, guess what? Reconciliation is not always expected because it's not always possible. It's not always possible. That's what it means when it says treat them like a heathen and a tax collector, 2 types of people you wouldn't want to hang out with in the New Testament. But let's flip the coin, because there's 2 sides of this coin that I've seen over the years. What if you have fault with your brother, and I've seen this too, because you saw them doing something or committing a sin they shouldn't be doing? How do you handle that? Hey, guess what? Guess what? You know what I saw? You know what I saw? I saw somebody, I was driving down the road, going into a gentleman's club, and they didn't see me, but I saw them. Whoa, guess what I saw them doing? And then I go to this corner, then I go to that corner, I go to this corner, then I go up to the front row, and everybody knows. So by the time I hear about something like this, I'll say, how do you know that's what they were really doing? Well, I saw them go in. Well, it just so happens I talked to them, and they told me a story that they had to go in there because their buddy had too much to drink and he was picking them up. But we've got them, what? Guilty and executed before we even hear the whole story. This is not how Christians ought to conduct themselves. And by the way, let's say it is true. Let's say they were going into the gentleman's club and they're overcoming a weakness. Is that something you want to tell everybody? Does it say embarrass them, slander them, shame them, or does it say restore them, go to them alone? Because I've seen these things happen in the church before. I've witnessed it. I have been a part of that conversation before. But that's not what people do. They talk. They talk. Brethren, mature Christians ought to go to that person, the offending party, alone, hoping that they will at least tell you why, or at least settle, what's going on in their lives, and maybe they'll tell you, man, I'm dealing with something. I shouldn't have done that. I'm sorry. Give them a chance to save face. Give them a chance to be restored, brethren. But that's really not what people do. We forget. We forget sometimes. And I know my time is short, But over here, what do people do? Over here in Proverbs chapter 16. Proverbs chapter 16. The other side of this coin, not just if we wrong somebody, but we see somebody doing something wrong. I call them the spiritual grave robbers. Spiritual grave robbers. You ever heard that song by Randy Travis? I'm digging up bones, I'm digging up bones. Exhuming things that are better left alone. I'm resurrecting memories of a time that's come and gone. I'm just sitting alone, digging up bones. You dig in somebody's grave long enough, you're going to find some bones. Right? Don't go digging in other people's graves. Here we go in verse 25 of Proverbs chapter 16. There is a way that seems right to a man. Oh, I saw him going to that gentleman's club. Guess what? Me with my Christ complex going to make sure everybody knows about this. We used to have a guy. There was a publication. I won't say it because I don't want to offend anybody. But he called himself the Wolf Hunter. You might remember that, Bill. I don't know if you remember that or not, but I won't say the name. But he was the Wolf Hunter. And he was on every minister's words, and every word that they said wrong, the Wolf Hunter got the wolf. And it did nothing but sow discord in the church. So I quit getting the publication. How we handle one another, brethren, man, it's very important because it's going to depend on how much we value the relationship and value the person that needs to be reconciled to what they're supposed to be doing. The person who labors for himself, but his hungry mouth drives him on. An ungodly man digs up evil. I'm digging up bones, I'm digging up bones, right? You know what that word means? To excavate. That means actively fault finding, like in excavating, unearthing, plotting, scheming with intent to cause harm to another. I certainly hope, brethren, that if we find ourselves in similar situations where we do have to address a situation with somebody. I know my wife had to do it one time. Was that easy, Angie, to do? She was living in a lifestyle of going the other way, and my wife got concerned, so guess what she did? Matthew 18, sit down and have a conversation. Good thing it worked out. She didn't change, but it did work out. They were still friends. But what I'm trying to press upon you here, brother, Matthew 18, no matter which side of the coin we're looking at here, is extremely difficult. It's easier to talk about someone than it is to talk to them. You know what I mean? I mean, that's always easy. Especially, how could I forget this? Especially with the internet. You know how many quiet people, how many docile personalities are out there that are offended in real life if they were sitting here right now and I offended them, would never say a word, but buddy, you put them on a keyboard. I call them King Kongs on keyboards. Man, they are 9 feet tall, bulletproof, and man, they are unstoppable. And then they sit there and they troll you. It's ridiculous. It really is. It's ridiculous. An ungodly man excavates and digs up evil, and it is on his lips like a burning fire. A perverse man sows strife, and a whisperer separates the best of friends. Hey, guess what? Guess what I saw? Oh, really? Go tell Tony, he's a friend of his. Oh, really? Hey, I'm not hanging out with you anymore. Separation. It, in fact, sows discord. It sows discord. A violent man entices his neighbor and leads him in the way that is not good. He winks with his eyes to devise perverse things. He purses his lips and brings about evil. What is evil? Excavating, unearthing, plotting, scheming with the intent to cause harm to another. Instead of using Matthew 18, this is not an alternative to Matthew 18, this type of behavior. It really isn't. Really isn't. But I'll finish up today, brethren. If you turn with me to 1 Peter chapter 4. 1 Peter chapter 4. First Peter chapter 4. Just a couple verses here. 11. Actually, let's begin at verse 13. Or let's go to verse 14. 1 Peter 4 and verse 14. If you are reproached for the name of Christ, blessed are you, for the Spirit of glory and of God rest upon you. On their part he is blasphemed, but on your part he is glorified. But let none of you suffer as a murderer. Ooh, who's he talking to here, brethren? He's not talking to those out there in society so much, is he? This is an epistle. This epistle was circulated through the churches. He's not talking to people out there. He's talking to people in here. That's what he's doing. That's his audience. The church is his audience in this. And he continues. Let none of you suffer as a murderer, a thief, or an evildoer, or as a busybody in other people's matters. Guess what? Guess what I saw Angie do? My son's not here. Guess what I saw Nick do? He's not here to defend himself, so I'll use him as an example. Nick, guess what I saw Nick do? Boy, he did A, B, C, D, and E. And man, was he really in it. He's really in trouble. Did you talk to him? Why are you talking to me? That's the one thing in the ministry that I've learned to do over these years. If someone comes to me and says, hey, I've got an issue with somebody. Oh, do you? Wow, I'm sorry to hear that. Why don't you do something about it? Me? I don't have a problem with them. You do. You should go to them. I don't even want to hear about it till you talk to them. Again, the Feast of Tabernacles, many years ago. I was walking in, checking in at the information booth, right, getting my name tag, getting ready to go in, and a lady approaches me. I won't say where. It's not important. See that lady over there, Tony? Which one? I see several of them. You know, the one that's dressed like a streetwalker. I looked around. I don't see anyone dressed like a streetwalker. Oh, you got to be kidding me. She's right there. I'm being nice. Look at her dress. It's cut too low. It's too short. Who does she think she is? That's offensive. You need to go talk to her. Me? Oh, no. I'm not doing your dirty work. I've got enough of my own Matthew 18 that I've got to do. I said, that's your job. You got a problem with them? You go talk to them. I don't even need to hear about it until you two have your conversation. Leave me out of it. I don't want to be a busybody in other people's matters. None of my business at this point. But that's not how people do it. That's not how people do it. But he continues. Yet if anyone suffers as a Christian, let him not be ashamed, but let him glorify God in this matter, for the time has come for the judgment to begin at the house of God. And if it begins with us first, notice that. What will the end of those who do not obey the gospel of God? Now, if the righteous one is scarcely saved, where will the ungodly and the sinner appear? Well, brethren, I hope you've enjoyed this 4-part sermon series on the benchmarks of a mature Christian. And I hope that as we navigate this world, that we start to get more familiarized with these scriptures and these benchmarks, and not just hear about them, not just read about them, but implement them in our lives, because we are on this quest to be spiritually mature, whether it's about habitual prayer, habitual study, staying persistent in times of duress. Those things are all important and paramount to the mature Christian. To think before we speak. It's better to stay silent and let others think you a fool than to open your mouth and remove all doubt, like Mark Twain said, okay? How we manage conflict in the church, personal offenses or dealing with someone else's sins or something like that, really, brethren, is based upon how much value we place on the person in that relationship and whether or not we realize that whether we like it or not, guess what? If we attain to that resurrection, we're going to be dealing with each other for eternity. It's time to use this time as a laboratory, brethren, a laboratory to overcoming some of these things. So hopefully we can gain mastery over these benchmarks, because next time I'm going to ask you how we're doing. I'm going to ask you how we're doing on these benchmarks. And then in my next part, not next time, but I'm going to put a pause on this. I'm going to get to the other benchmarks because I haven't even talked about fasting. Who wants to do that? It's actually good for you. Meditation, all these other things. These things are important. I didn't put them in order of importance. But until then, brethren, gain mastery. Look at these things. Study them. Implement them. They're not easy. None of this stuff is easy, especially Matthew 18. But the more you do it, the easier it becomes. The easier it becomes, the more you value relationships. The more you value relationships, the better off we'll be in the long run with one another because they'll be lasting relationships. It's not just about 1,000 years reigning with Christ, brethren. It's about being together for eternity. Gain mastery over these things, brethren, and life will be much, much easier and will be less likely that the world will rub off on us. Go over, brethren, and enjoy the benchmarks of what it is to be a mature Christian.